Hi there, my name is Dickson, and I am an award-winning and multilingual tutor here at the Profs, having graduated from the LSE. I specialize in subject tutoring in economics, maths, and Mandarin for GCSE and A levels, as well as 11 plus, 13 plus, 16 plus Cat 4 and ISEP entrance exams for the UK's most competitive, independent and grammar school admissions. Students that I have tutored or currently tutoring are in top UK schools such as King's School Wimbledon, Dulwich College, St Paul's, Cheltenham Ladies, Wickham Abbey, etc., and in some of the UK's best universities like Oxford, Cambridge, the LSE, UCL, King's College London, etc. 97% of my students achieve at least a grade B at A levels, with 72% achieving at least an A stars and A's. And I also boast a 100% success rate when it comes to GCSE students achieving at least a grade 6. So today, I want to discuss with you one of the more difficult, some people may even say the hardest content on the A-level economics course, which is topic related to market failure. Now, why is that most difficult, or why people say that is one of the hardest concepts to grasp and to present in the exam? For three reasons. Number one, because a question in this form normally combines three different topics together, which is market failure, government intervention, and government failure. The second top series and why people find it very difficult is because the diagrams itself are very hard to use, to understand, to memorize, and to incorporate it in your 25 marker. And the third and final reason is just because market failure itself is just simply not an easy topic to understand. So these three reasons have made one of these micro questions one of the most difficult one to grasp. So today, I want to demonstrate one with you on how to tackle this question. I will show you a plan on what, if I were to sit the exam, how I would break down the question and then what I would write in order to get in that very top band. So here we have an example question here. Discuss how a government might intervene to correct market failure within the energy sector. So as we begin with your essay, as we do our planning, the first thing we have to do is an introduction. In the introduction, what do you do? Well, first of all, you should try to define key terminology within the question, because that is knowledge, and knowledge is rewarded in the exam as part of the marking criteria. So show off knowledge by giving background information and crucially textbook definitions to the question. Well, in this case, what are some key economics terminology that we see? Market failure. In fact, that's probably the only one. We cannot really define anything else. Market failure is the one. So in our introduction, define market failure. Show the examiner what you know about market failure, at least on a surface level. So let's dig into a little bit of detail. What exactly is market failure? Well, the textbook definition is a market failure is a misallocation of resources, such that resources in society are allocated not in the most optimal use. So write that definition and you show off knowledge. We can then proceed to talk about the two different types of market failure that we know. One of them is a complete market failure, and the other one is a partial market failure. What's the difference? A complete market failure is also known as a missing market, where a good or a service is completely missing, meaning that there's no market for it. And we assign these goods, which we call public goods. So we can say that under the public good markets, which are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, then we will get a complete market failure. We don't need to dig any deeper than this, partly because this is an introduction, but also we know that the energy sector is certainly not in the missing market. Otherwise, there will be no energy being supplied whatsoever. So that's clearly not the case. But we can talk a little bit more about partial market failure, which is in this allocation of resources. We can explain that the wrong quantity is produced or consumed, which therefore leads to a non-socially optimal solution. Once we're given those background contexts, the introduction is done. So now we move on to the main body. Now, before we dig deep into the main body, we should understand what to include in the main body. Imagine this is one of the top questions that you were asked, which is worth 25 marks. This essay in your main body, I would recommend students to write 2 to 3 main paragraphs, and each paragraph should always only follow one point. Try not to bundle more than one point into the same paragraph. Instead, if you've got something else to say, put it in another paragraph. Within each paragraph, try to follow the structure of K, A, E. The first one is knowledge. Knowledge means explain your point. So in this question, the point might be you might want to choose what intervention method would the government choose in order to intervene in the energy sector. Give that intervention method, and that's the point. The second one here is application. So either use any information that is already provided to you in the paper or your own knowledge within that energy sector to supplement your answer. This will ensure that your answer is comprehensive and also insightful and shows that you are able to bring well-researched points incorporated within the context of the energy sector. Now, these two are the crucial. This is where the vast majority of your marks will be rewarded. This A stands for analysis. Analysis is a cause and effect relationship, but broken down into a step-by-step explanation. So we'll do an example later, but for now, hypothetically speaking, let's say that you choose, if you were running the government, you might choose to implement a carbon tax to solve the problem within the energy sector. Well, then your cause and effect relationship will be explaining how does the tax exactly work using a diagram, and ultimately, blah, 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 end up eliminating the market failure that otherwise would persist. And then the last one, E, is your evaluation. Your evaluation is a pushback, an equal force pushback to your analysis. Everything you say here, if you've done it correctly, where you build that chain of reasoning, your evaluation is to find any gaps or chink within that analysis so that what you say here may not happen 100% of the time or may not happen under every single scenario. These two are written in the form of chain of reasoning, and diagrams should be included either in here or both if you choose to. So let's dig deep into this. Now that we understand the structure, let's dig deep into how to solve this question. Now, I'll give you one paragraph example on how to tackle this, and all you have to do is think of two or one other government intervention method in order to solve the market failure. As you can see, what I'm going to do, as I said at the beginning, is I'm going to combine the market failure with the government intervention, with the government failure, all bundled into one paragraph. And you just have to repeat that again, or repeat it 3 times if you have time. And that's your main body. So to start off, I would explain what is the market failure in the energy sector. I would explain that the process of producing energy makes that a demerit good. What is a demerit good? A demerit good is over the course of consumption or over the course of production, it generates external costs to a third party outside of the market. So because it's the energy, again, I can't just state this in a general, so I'm not going to be specific within context. So I might explain that because we're in the energy sector, for example, a power station produces energy for all of us to use. In the process of the power station producing electricity, they would end up polluting the neighborhood. For example, polluting the water in the river or emitting carbon emission into the atmosphere, so that the external cost is the harmful health consequences to the rest of us. Now the government may have to spend more money on the NHS in order to look after sick people who live around the power station, or that the carbon emission is not just going to affect the rest of the UK, but potentially our neighboring countries as well. These people are not involved in the production of power, of energy, and yet they get affected. That is the external cost. I've given the definition, and I've also explained what the external cost is in this context, which is the energy production. So now I have to talk about the problem, right? I haven't really talked about problem yet. I said, okay, this is a demerit good. The problem with this is that the demerit good is overproduced. Relative to what though? Overproduced? Well, overproduced compared to the socially optimal amount. We assume that there is a optimal amount of electricity that should be generated, and yet because of the demerit good nature of it, that this production is more than the socially optimal, and that is what leads to partial market failure as defined earlier in the introduction. Okay, so we've now said what the problem is. We are overproducing energy. We are creating external costs for those who are not involved in this. How do we solve this? So once I've defined the problem, now I'm going to give a solution. I'm going to say, for instance, as I said earlier, government can introduce something called a carbon tax, which is a tax on polluters. And I'm going to use a diagram to explain how the tax can solve the problem. So first, don't forget to label the diagram. Here I have cost and benefit, and here I have the quantity of electricity generated. Now, because I said earlier that this is a demerit good, and I've also put it on production, that means on the diagram, there's going to be only one demand curve. This is your demand curve here. But instead, I'm going to get two supply curve. MSE, marginal social cost. MPC, marginal private cost. This is the cost to the whole society. This is the cost to the individual power station. Of course, as you would expect, the cost to the whole society is way more than the cost to the individual. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a demerit good. Otherwise, there won't be external costs. This gap here is the external cost. So I then explain, okay, well, if you leave the firms alone and you don't do anything whatsoever, they will choose this, where MPC equals to MPB. We call that the free market equilibrium. They will naturally choose to produce quantity Q1, and it's going to cost them P1 to do so. However, where is the market failure? Well, that has to be a different compared to the socially optimal. The socially optimal, which is here, is where MSC equals to MSB. So that should be Q2 and P2 here. So now we see the problem. This guy, this is the problem. Remember I said overproduction? This Q1 minus Q2, that is where the overproduction happens. In the best case scenario, society would be most benefit when they only generate this amount of electricity, Q2, but now they're generating Q1. So this gap is the overproduction. So you see what I've done so far is that I've used the diagram to explain the problem that I was talking about. And now I'm going to particularly highlight where the market failure is to show the examiner that I know what I'm talking about. Where is the market failure? If I go up from the free market equilibrium quantity, go up, go up, go up. This shaded triangle here is what we call a deadweight loss, otherwise also known as a net welfare loss. The existence of this triangle, I'm going to say in my essay that this is the market failure. So you see, what I've done so far is I've used chain of reasoning, and I've used a diagram to explain what the problem is. If you rewind and listen to every word I say, I am building a logical sequence to my explanation. Now, I'm going to talk about how I can solve this, which is the tax. A tax is going to increase the cost of production. When the cost of production increases, we know that the supply curve will shift to the left. So the producer's supply curve will shift this way after I implement the tax. Now, if the government were to do it right, this MPC curve, after it shifts to the left, will completely realign with the MSC curve. Why does that work though? Well, because if you look at the MPC curve, at the moment, it is only costing them P1. That is why they're overproducing the electricity. If you were to increase the cost and you shift this curve to the left, they will end up moving here, incurring a much higher cost where the gap here is indeed the carbon tax. And because of this point, you see that will naturally reduce the production. Back to Q2. And now you got, finally, when you do this, a free market equilibrium. Once again, we align with the socially optimal position. Instead of 2 equilibrium, you only have 1 equilibrium. And the carbon tax solved the problem. So now I've done step 2. I've talked about how the carbon tax, what is a carbon tax? What does it do? Increase the cost of production. What does it do on the diagram? And after I've shifted the diagram, I explain we went from the producer costing this much to costing this much. They went from producing this much to producing this much. When you shift the diagram, you have to explain the before and after effect and the before and after result. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to explain why the tax worked. I've explained why the tax managed to achieve this result, and I've explained why this result eliminates the market failure because these two align and this shaded area is no more after we've done this. So I've now done step 2. I've explained how the government can use one of the policy, for example, a carbon tax, that will eliminate the market failure. So if you go back to what we said about KAAE, so far, have I explained the point? Yes. Have I drawn on real-life applications to explain how market failure is eliminated? Yes. Have I used chain of reasoning and diagrams to explain how the tax could eliminate the market failure? Yes. There's only one thing left to do, which is the evaluation. I've done market failure, I've done government intervention, and I haven't done government failure. So therefore, the government failure has to come in the evaluation now. So, as stated, what we had to do now is think about why does the carbon tax not necessarily able to solve the overproduction of energy and therefore causing all this extra pollution or in the river or atmosphere or whatever. So again, remember we have to build it as a chain of reasoning. What we could say is, first of all, due to a lack of information, otherwise known as asymmetric information, the government may not know exactly how much to tax the polluter because government operates on information and data is not perfect. So if they end up, say, undertaxing the polluter, the power station, that would render the policy completely useless because then they're still going to carry on polluting. So we should make a note of that. We should say, what happens when they undertax the polluter? But don't forget to also present the other side. What happens though if they overtax? With the undertax, it doesn't solve the problem and the externality, the negative externality, the external cost persists. With the overtax, that problem you could argue may be even more serious. Because if you overtax, that means that the firms are now faced with 2 choices. If the firms decided to leave the UK because they go, okay, this is way too expensive to produce in the UK. I'm just going to grab my bags and I'm going to go to another country. Well, what happens then? That means a couple of problems. Number 1, jobs are lost. Those who work in the energy sector will see themselves lose their jobs. And what happens if they lose their jobs? Now we get a bit of a chain from here. If they lose their jobs, that means due to a lack of income, poverty in the UK will go up. But what about if they don't leave? What if they decide to stay? Well, what are they going to do instead? If they're going to stay in the UK, they're going to see an increase in the cost of production. And therefore, they're going to also increase the price of selling us energy. If you look at UK right now, the price of heating, cooling, electricity has gone up. So the price is going to go up because they're going to pass it on to the consumers. And then what? Keep asking yourself the question, and then what? Okay, so what's the big deal if the price goes up? Well, that means those who will suffer the most due to the high energy price are the poor people in the working class. And when that happens, you are going to increase the level of inequality. And So you see, you've basically explained that if they do this, this is the problem. But if they do this, this is also the problem. So you've been comprehensive on the issue of evaluating the carbon tax. If this case happens, then is ineffective. But if this happens, these are all the problems that you will face. And this is all built together in one logical sequences. And furthermore, we can also incorporate other topics into this. This is where we said about in the economics, you want to incorporate different topic to make it connects. Okay, but you can argue, well, if the price of something goes up, inequality may not always go up because people can simply not buy it. But remember, one of the things about electricity is that it is inelastic. The demand is inelastic, meaning that you cannot live without it. It's not like you can say because the price goes up, therefore I'm not going to buy it. So due to the inelastic nature of it, it means that the consumer will absorb most of the tax burden, not the business. Because electricity is a necessity. So what we've done here is the final part where we have evaluated why the carbon tax, for example, may not work. And we've used chain of reasoning to illustrate why this could be a pushback to the point that we just made. And if you're able to write this in as an equal pushback force to your analysis, that would be the final bit to your paragraph, which is the last letter E, evaluation. And repeat this for another paragraph, or repeat it over 2 paragraphs, depending on your time, and then finish off with a strong conclusion. And that's how you would get that A star. So if you find this video useful, please give it a like and consider subscribe to our channel, where we give tutors like you the insider knowledge you need to get the best grades possible and also thrive to reach your academic goals. If you're interested in learning more about A-level economics and to prepare for your A-level economics exam, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or our team of professionals. The contact information should be on the screen right now. I'm Dickson Wong. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the very best of luck with your upcoming exams.